So what is it you do?
You go for escape usually.
Oh, escape. All right.
Slideshow.
Escape. Yeah.
You go from beginning. Okay, I think this is here. Display settings. So to take this slideshow, I think I will. Yeah, perfect.
Duplicate slideshow.
Yeah. So
So you do the beginning.
you go to slideshow. You go
Slideshow.
from beginning, or if you want
Right.
from kind of side as well, you can go here.
Beginning.
And,
Yeah, that's fine.
display settings, and you
And
go
then
duplicate slide. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Good. That's clear. All right. Excellent. Thank
Most
you.
welcome.
Now I understand. Right.
Most welcome.
Hello.
Found it. Do you want some more light, or are you happy? What? Do you want some more light, or are you happy? So it's less than ideal, but what I usually do is just this. Okay.
Yeah, that's working. Okay. So do I just put this in my belt?
You could try it and see. I find it's a little sensitive, but you can see. So it may work there well. I'm just saying that if you put it around your neck, there's a good chance it's going to be too loud.
Oh, I see.
But
see.
so try it and see how it
So
goes.
that is another option.
Yeah. And one thing that I haven't ever found in this room are pens.
Pens?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, like for the attendance code, I actually just stick it on the first slide.
I couldn't. Where is it?
Right.
Now that's a very, very good point.
Yeah. So
Because normally they send it to me. I don't know what happened.
you have to get this app thing.
Oh, wait a minute. It's on the. You have to go to the app to get. That's right. We had a discussion about this.
Yeah. So it's.
I remember.
There you go. GM
Oh, hold
SK.
on. I'll have to write that down.
Yeah. Or here, just stick it on your slide.
Okay. Right. So
GM SK IP.
IP now that has got these gaps there
Yeah.
and there.
Yeah.
GMSKIP. So I've got a hunch. I'm not very sure if I was able to get the app on the mobile, but I was going to ask.
Yeah, no, last year you could get it off of
Can
the
I get it off? Can I
webpage.
get it off the laptop?
You could last year, but this year you can't.
Really?
Which is, yeah. And the good news is it's actually easier.
Even this. I mean, I've got that on my laptop.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
So yeah. So okay, just all right. That's something I have to look into next week.
All right. And yeah, if you decide you want more light,
Oh yeah. Okay. I don't like that.
yeah.
That's okay. The dark's fine. So what do you do you have a break?
Yeah, so it depends on the night. I either give them 15 minutes kind of in the middle,
Right.
or I give them 10 minutes after each sort of 45, 50 minutes.
Okay.
And they don't, that works.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Right.
both work.
And what do they do, and what do you do? I mean, when you have your break, there's nowhere to go to.
There isn't really anywhere to go to. They usually just sort of go outside and stand around.
Oh,
I
right.
usually end up answering questions most of the time.
Oh, right. Oh, yes.
There's no.
Toilets?
I haven't found one yet. There should. I think there's
don't
one
need one.
upstairs. Yeah, I haven't looked, but I'm pretty sure there's one upstairs. So if you like outside of this door, I don't know whether you came in that door or this door. The upper door, there's kind of this foyer sort of area,
Right.
and I think there's a toilet off of that. But there's not really anything off of this
Yeah,
one.
sure.
But that one I think has.
Yeah, I came in and came down some stairs. So,
Yes, you probably came in.
and I guess they don't have any sort of cafe or whatever.
Not that I've seen.
Okay, so next time I should bring a bottle of water. Did you
I usually bring a bottle of water because I haven't actually seen a water machine. So in other words, like if you empty the thing out, I haven't actually seen a water machine anywhere. So you are literally on your own with the amount you bring, like trekking into the desert.
Okay, well that's useful to know.
I'll take a look at the break if I can find something outside for you if you get stuck down here.
Okay,
And I'll take a look. Yeah.
all right.
And I'll see. I'll probably stay for about half, and then we'll see how it goes.
Okay, right.
And then I'll
Okay,
come
good.
for probably the same every class, just so that I know what's going on, and it makes it
Okay,
easier
okay.
from the standpoint of figuring out the exam at the end.
Okay, that sounds fine. All right. Do you think I should be starting? We're now after.
Yeah, you're good to go whenever you
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, can you hear me? I've got the microphone, but I've got it in my hip, and I don't know if that's going to be adequate. The alternative is to have it around my neck, and I've been told that's likely to be too loud for you. So,
I'd say try it around your neck for a minute. It's a little quiet.
yep, a little quiet. Okay. How does this sound? Is that better? Okay, all right. So you'll have to forgive me if you get the sound of a lot of breathing or something like that, or coughing. Good. Well, good evening, I should say. My name is Peter Cameron, Professor Cameron, and my base is normally the Lincoln's Inn Fields campus at Holborn, not here. or Myland, and I am the professor of energy and climate law, and I'm also the co-director of the commercial and corporate law, international business law, LLM program. So I do quite a bit of work on the commercial side, and so I'm here joining Professor Arner in this course, and for the next few weeks I will be talking to you about various commercial issues which arise primarily from my own area of expertise, the energy sector. And the energy sector is one which is at the moment topical, but it's been pretty topical as far as I can remember for a very, very long time, albeit in different ways. Enormous ramifications for international commerce in many, many different ways. And today, what I'm going to do is give a kind of global introduction to how energy and natural resource issues interface with international commercial law. So I hope that's going to be clear to you, but if not, of course, you're very welcome to raise questions. We will have an intermission. I think I'd probably prefer to go for something like an hour, at least, before we stop. And then I think you can have a break and for 10 minutes and have a walk outside and do what you like. And then we can resume again. So let's say, first of all, I've got an authorization code as well for you. I'll give you that once we get near the break. But if for any reason I forget, can you just remind me? I'm not going to be upset if anybody just sort of waves their hand and said, please, can I have the authorization code? I might get too carried away with my subject and just forget, but it's very important for you, and I'm happy to share it with you. All right, so a little bit, I think, probably about myself, because you've had several lectures so far from Professor Arner, who I'm sure has given you information about himself. So maybe a little bit about myself. I'm sorry about that photograph. It was taken when I was perhaps in a bad mood, but I've got it removed from the website because it's just too sad. Anyway, so there you are. Despite my accent, I should emphasize that I am in fact not English, and I've never been English in my life. I am actually Scottish. And I come from Edinburgh in Scotland, which is a very interesting city, very pretty city. I would recommend you visit it at some point. You occasionally bump into interesting people. At my time there, I managed to bump into the man who used to play James Bond, Sean Connery, who's sadly departed, and J.K. Rowling as well. Once when I was in a shop, and various other people who have some link to the city. So it's been quite an interesting place to be based in from time to time. I'm a barrister, but I'm not a barrister in Scots law. Like many of you, I took the view that English law was likely to be useful from the point of view of international commerce and business. There's likely to be more work, more practice. So I decided that rather than being a specialist in a small jurisdiction like the Scots one, I became a specialist in English law. And a lot of people who use English law, as you probably know, are not English. It's used in many, many international transactions by people who are actually from other countries. So it's a very good export for England, this very pro-commerce type of law. And in the past, I've worked in a number of different places. And also, I suppose, on the practical side, in the distant past, I used to be a consultant, so I visited quite a few countries that you're from, but also I don't do that now at all. I now get involved in arbitrations. And arbitration I like very, very much, because in energy there are just endless disputes. There's so many disputes, and they tend to be quite high-value disputes, and very diverse, very, very interesting. So I get involved as an arbitrator and sometimes as an expert in these disputes. You might say, well, now that we're getting clean energy or cleaner energy, we'll have fewer disputes than you would get in the nasty oil and gas industry, which is full of those fossil fuels and so on. But actually, that's not been the case at all. Renewables produce an extraordinary number of disputes, many of them very, very commercial. So anybody who ever tries to tell you that we're moving into an environment in which there will be cleaner energy, and therefore people will be happier, and there will be more consensus, and they will not be fighting each other, is talking nonsense. On renewables, which I also teach, a lot of disputes, and those will not go away. There are all sorts of reasons which I'll touch on today, because in the second part of my talk, I'll talk quite a bit about renewable energy and the problems that arise there on the commercial side. So that's me, a certain amount of practice, and here I am at Queen Mary University with its different campuses, and I am very happy to be here with you, especially on this particular course. Now, what am I going to be talking about? I'll give you an idea about some of the topics and in general, and then also some topics in today's class, and then some of the sources that are available. And I'll be putting up a reading list on the website soon, this week, so that you'll have access to different resources. Please do get in touch with me if you have difficulty finding any of them, because I know how frustrating it can be when you're looking for certain sources and they turn out to be elusive. Most of them, I think, should be straightforward, however. Okay, so our focus is going to be primarily, it's all right, we haven't touched on anything terribly important yet. I've just given an introduction to myself. I think that's quite important, but anyway, that's not probably as important for any of you. But anyway, here we are. So the focus is going to be on energy transactions, although I would add that when it comes to these transactions, you always have to keep in mind what can happen, which is disputes. People fall out, and frequently, very often. And when you're engaging in any contract design, you always have to think about the possibility that there will be a dispute, because once the dispute starts, it's too late for you to start planning for the dispute. You've either planned already at the beginning when everybody was happy and smiling, or you've left it too late. Anyway, with renewables, for example, anticipating just a little, you find that there's a tremendous pressure to introduce renewables in certain parts of the world. Some parts of the world not, but in some parts, especially Europe, you get this big drive. We're in a hurry. We've got targets. We need to meet them. And so there's a pressure to move fast on introducing renewables. This is an absolutely excellent formula for disputes, because the speed with which you're moving means that you will be using technologies that are new and untested, or they're established technologies, but you're probably using them in new ways. That just leads to things going wrong. The first thing that happens when things go wrong on the commercial side, and I know that because I co-teach the renewables class with someone who's an in-house counsel for a renewables firm. The first thing that happens is that when it's gone wrong, the fingers are pointing like this. It's not my fault, it's this person's fault or this person's fault. I'm not, it's like, could be like very, very angry. I am not taking the blame. So they're trying to find somebody to blame. This happens all the time. And you have to anticipate this. And if you're moving really fast with new technologies, the first thing that you'll find is that there'll be defects. Some of the parts that you get will be produced in a hurry, and they will have defects. So that's why the blame game will start. Somebody's going to be saying, who's responsible for the defect? Or somebody else says, I can't do what I said I would do because I haven't got a part. This blade on the turbine is not working properly, so we need a new blade. Okay, where's it going to come from? That's not my business. I don't want to know. I want this moving. And then the question is, well, for the time that is being wasted, who's paying for that? So you get these disputes. It's a very, very common, multiple disputes, usually before sometimes in the courts, sometimes before the body called the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. It's in the arbitration system. So I'm trying to emphasize this a little bit at the beginning because I don't want anybody to have this idea that some kinds of energy are kind of nicer than others. You have to be neutral with all of them. From a legal point of view, they all produce problems. But it's a very, very, very big item of business for law firms who are engaged in international commercial work. Okay, so I'd say it's a major element. I don't have a statistic, but I do know most of the firms in London will be engaged in some kind of energy-related work. It's a pretty good way of illustrating some of the problems that come up in different sectors. And it's also the case that with energy, it's not like in a compartment. It overlaps with, say, construction law, with infrastructure problems. You've read a lot, I'm quite sure, about AI. Who hasn't? You have to be living on another planet if you're not to hear about it. But who is the new energy consumer? Well, AI, yeah, but how do you deal with energy with AI? What do you need? What?
Cooling system.
System is good, but what?
Internet.
Yeah, okay, but these are kind of, you're on the way, on the ground. What do you need? I heard some. What was that? Data, yes, but you missed the key word, center. Data center. This is big stuff. You know, these are huge constructions. Nothing will work without these data centers, and the money that is being put into them is enormous, absolutely enormous. And once upon a time, there was something I think called Moore's Law. It was all about chips. The chips, every few years, they would expand by a certain factor. I can't remember what it was. But that was the big thing in the digital expansion with chips. Every time the capacity would increase like by a certain factor. That's not the problem now. The problem now is you can't expand without energy for your data center. Without that energy, it's a huge problem. It's a problem getting your planning permission, yes, but once you've got your data center up and running, in fact, you're not going to get it up and running without first being sure that you have a flow of energy. Where's it going to come from? It could be nuclear, it could be renewables. Why would that be a problem? We'd like it to be renewables because we want to expand green energy, but why, if you run your data center on renewables, why might that be a problem? Run out. I like that. Come on. They're interruptible. What happens if the wind doesn't blow? What happens if the sun doesn't shine? The data center has to run 7 days a week, 24/7. So there is one of a number of issues. How can you make sure that it's going to be reliable? This is a very, very important energy consumer, the data center, which we never had before. 5 years ago, I wouldn't even be mentioning it. Ireland, tiny country, has 20% of all the data centers in Europe. They're expanding everywhere. The UK is keen to have more and more of them. Okay, one question we've identified: how do you, as it were, fuel the data centers? What kind of energy do you use? That has implications because we're supposed to be moving to a greener energy system, but actually those will need reliable sources of energy, which means they're going to have backup from gas. Or it could even be, and I'm sorry to say it, coal, which is notoriously dirty, but it's also cheap in particularly in certain parts of the world, in Asia, as some of you will know. So that's one problem. But another problem with your data center, this is what I'm trying to say is energy might seem like a little box. It's not, or maybe a big box, but it's not. It overlaps with construction, infrastructure, and it overlaps with the digital transformation at the moment. And you've got that question, about the more policy question, really, about the kind of energy that you would use for them. But another question you've got is, how does a data center use energy? Well, it doesn't use energy like you do or I do. It's not a typical energy consumer. And the whole of the grids in Europe, United States, Canada, and all sorts of other grids that are being built everywhere in the world, because there's a massive demand, a thirst for electricity. Parts of sub-Saharan Africa get the electricity now. They're desperate for it. So there's a huge demand for electricity. So in that context, how, with these new centers, how are they going to work? How are they going to work with your grid? The answer is, if you look at some research that's been done in the United States, which is very advanced on all of this, you can see that the regulatory agencies have done the research, or commissioned it anyway. You can see how at certain times your energy consumer uses energy and it spikes up like that. Now, a spike isn't unusual. If you're doing a cooking, your evening meal and so on in the 6 o'clock or whatever it is in whatever country you're in, that'd be normal. Unfortunately, they can spike up unexpectedly during the day and in seconds. And that means that the whole grid system is just really put under sudden pressure. Can it handle it? All of our grids have just not been built for that kind of demand. So, what does it mean? You might have a situation of instability. That means blackouts or brownouts, there are various names. And this is something that's going to see in in the next few years. It will happen unexpectedly. It's not. I'm sorry to sound rather dark, but it's not a good way. Another thing, the last point I'm just going to make about data centers, just a very topical. So I thought I'd just squeeze this in. Last point is that their demand is big. They want a lot, and they're in a hurry. The kind of people that run them, by the way, are also not like you and me. These are your techie people. These are the people, they have made not small amounts of money. They have made very, very large amounts of money. They are not used to being patient. They are very pushy people. And basically, those people are going to be demanding their energy. The risk is that the cost of the energy for people like you and me goes up, because maybe they take a lot of the energy out of the system, and there's rather less left for us. The economics of the electricity pricing can be affected by this new energy user. So for all these reasons, the digital side of things is very, very topical at the moment. There's a lot of research going on to try and understand it better. And some of us in universities are quite keen to contribute to that. But it will be a source of a lot of commercial disputes in the future. So something to keep in mind. So you have these, and another area, of course, is an overlap with maritime law. And I'll be coming back to that very, very shortly about the overlap between energy and shipping. Okay, so those are some of the overlaps that I thought I'd point out to you, so that we get a sense of the global and the far-reaching aspects of the energy influence on commercial law. And I've made some other comments there on the slide. I don't think I'll go into them. I have emphasized arbitration. Yes, a dispute settlement. Arbitration tends to be the favored mode of solving disputes, largely because although it's not as quick as people think it is, it's quicker than the alternatives. And the other thing is, parties, especially business people, do not like publicity, and they would prefer that private system of settling or resolving disputes rather than the publicity that you're likely to get if you go through the courts. That's another factor. So by and large, I don't know if you've met many business people, but they do tend to be fairly averse to publicity, not least because their whole modus vivendi is in a competitive environment. Okay, I'm going to highlight some of the unusual and some of the common features of energy transactions as well. Now, here at the risk of sounding a little bit immodest, some of these publications are mine. That's partly because they're fairly easy for you to get your hands on. That's why they're on the list here. But I'll give you a longer list. I'll upload it to the website, and that will have a slightly wider range of sources. The World Bank book is, I still think, very, very useful. It's been downloaded 86,000 times so far, and it's free. So, but it doesn't deal with renewables. So on that, you will have to look elsewhere. The International Energy Investment Law book does have quite a bit on renewables, but not as much as it will if it goes into a third edition, which the publisher is keen that I should start working on. Okay, that's so much for the sources. Here we go. Let's be topical in a different way today. We've looked at the digital side of things and how data centers are so important. Here we've got the area right smack in the Middle East, called the Straits of Hormuz. Now, I apologize if somebody is in the group here who thinks that I've mispronounced it. It's quite possible. But the key point here, just to take away, now don't worry, there's nothing political about anything I'm going to say. If you have a look at that, you see this narrow area which is crucial for certain kinds of international shipping. It's not the only key area in the world, but it's one of them. So have a look at that, and as we know, at the moment, it's effectively blocked. I don't think it's much a physical thing of it being blocked. It's more that from a commercial point of view, the insurance companies are basically saying, if you go round that area, we will not insure your cargo. Or we will insure it, but at a ridiculously high premium. And for that reason, it gets effectively blocked. So this is actually quite important to keep in mind, that sometimes things may appear to be like this, but actually they're not. It's somebody else is doing something to block something happening. And in this case, it seems to be the insurance companies. However, this is not relevant to our topic. Instead, let's have a look at why any block would matter. It matters because this is a major oil and gas transit route. And here are just some figures from the International Energy Agency about how important it is for international commerce. And for any of you who happen to drive a car or buy petrol, this is something that you will be directly affected by these changes. But there are certain little elements in this that I want to unpack for you. First of all, seaborne trade. So you see that there is that this kind of energy. It could be oil, but it could also be gas, particularly in a liquefied form, carried through these water spaces. Now I'll come back to that shortly, but that's something to keep in mind, that you have at any time of the day, any day of the week, you have a huge amount of energy moving around on the seas. And for certain, and also another point is that if you look at the countries that are involved in all of this, what you'll find is Britain isn't one of them. So in terms of the countries that are affected by this block, it's certain regions more than others. And that is very much also something that you get in the international economy. You get not so much diversity, but inequality. And diversity that has sometimes negative effects on certain people. It's mostly Asian countries that are going to be affected by the changes, particularly in the oil trade, and rather less with gas. But you're talking about fairly big percentages here. And probably the other takeaway about this is that when it comes to energy, this kind of commercial activity usually involves a very large role for the state. So that it's not just that it can get political in the sense that there'll be other disputes that result in energy being used as a sort of weapon, but it's just often the case that for countries that I've mentioned there, like Bahrain and Kuwait and Qatar, that for them, the income that they get from this trade is enormously important, because for them, they get income through tax, but also they have state companies. So the state company, which is a major employer as well as a source of revenue and a source of advice to the government, is another way in which the state is involved in many countries. So this energy can have a strategic significance in many countries. In fact, probably in most countries, energy has strategic significance. And you have, and I'm conscious Professor Arner is in the room, so I hope he doesn't get upset, but you have certain people on the other side of the Atlantic at the moment who take the view that renewable energy is a bad deal and should be stopped. I think this is very, very based on a misunderstanding about renewable energy. You don't always have to connect it to the climate to think that it's important and valuable. Another way of looking at it is that renewable energy is very, very good for your domestic security. It's usually produced at home. So in your own country, you have control over it. Wind, offshore, onshore, solar, whatever. The more you have of it, the more control you've got over your energy system. That is important given that for many, many countries, I hesitate to say most, oil and gas is produced somewhere else. So you have to import it. And if anything goes wrong with that supply, you're in trouble. Now, it may not be your fault, but something's gone wrong with the supply. So you're dependent on the supplier and the route to get it to you. Whereas if it's, say, your own wind that you're relying on, then in principle, that's going to make your system more secure. Now, I'm not trying to promote those renewables. It's more like in your diverse energy package, you might have an element of renewables, and a strong reason for having it is that security aspect. But again, that's not commercial. That's more like a policy aspect of it. Let's go to have a look at energy transactions then. What I said was that there's an overlap between this kind of the economic sector and the law associated with it, and other kinds of law. And I would also emphasize mining and commodities generally. Mining triggers that key idea that I hope you've already heard quite a lot about, and that's the supply chain. If you haven't got a supply of certain key minerals, there's an awful lot that's not going to work or that's going to be vulnerable in your modern economy and society. My phone's over there, but a phone will be an example. There are all sorts of minerals that are necessary to make that phone what it is. Your defense system includes huge numbers of minerals. So all this, everybody's now waking up to supply chain vulnerability. And the response to that is state intervention. And I was reading today in the Financial Times that Germany is following a model that Japan has already pioneered, and that is that there will be a kind of domestic, state-owned warehouse of key minerals. So that, whereas Japan has apparently been doing this for some time, Germany is going to follow the same route. In other words, it's worried about losing access to key minerals, and therefore it's intervening into the market and building up some kind of what you would call it, like a domestic warehouse of supplies to mitigate its exposure. And you're getting more and more of this, of state intervention in the markets, the commercial markets. Okay, that's point one, the overlap with different areas. Legal problems, first, maybe three of them, let's say. First of all, the presence of the state or state entities, that can be complicating. Often in contracts, what you're doing is you're trying to pretend that the state company is a commercial company. And indeed, it may be structured as a company that is effectively a commercial company rather than a state-owned company. I think an example of that would be Qatar Energy. And there are some other companies in the Middle East that have been restructured, so that technically, from a legal point of view, they are private companies. But you then have that sort of irony that they're private, yes, in law, but they're 100% owned by the state. So does that really mean they're private? Not really. So it's a sort of schizophrenic type relationship in the contract. It just means that if anything goes wrong, you're dealing not just with the company, but with the owner, who may be in the background, but they will be there, and that owner is potentially rather powerful. Okay, another thing to keep in mind, I've already anticipated it, the liability issue. When things go wrong, what happens? This is quite a technically complex area, so things easily go wrong, and when they go wrong, it's not always clear who's responsible, and it's also, if you have a dispute, a complicating factor, because if you go into a court or before a tribunal, you're going to have to explain to the judge or the arbitrators what the technical problem is that has caused one side to say that the other side is liable and the other side to say, no, we're not, it's not our fault. So what you have in this field when you have, say, arbitrations, you commonly find that you have experts brought in. It's a very, very common feature of dispute resolution that you have experts brought in. And you can imagine what kind of experts. Sometimes they're engineers, sometimes they're geologists, sometimes they're accountants. They're not necessarily lawyers. So I've been an expert, and one of the things I've sometimes had to do is to talk about something called good international energy practice. What does that mean? And why is Professor Cameron talking about this in a dispute? The answer is the other side probably will bring in somebody from the industry who says, I know all about what is good international practice. And I can say with authority, I've been in the industry for, say, 40 years, and so on and so forth. The reason why they want Professor Cameron is because they don't trust that person who's been in the industry, yes, but he's probably conflicted. So that sort of thing comes up quite a lot. But you have to try and present the issues to the adjudicator in a way that makes complex issues intelligible. And that's, if you're a counsel, that can be very challenging. And that means that sometimes for the expert, they have to do something called educate the tribunal. So it's really very, very important practical matter. Or you might find that the adjudicator just doesn't understand what the issue is. And this is not necessarily about some small part of a wind turbine. This could be something that is enormously important for the case, and a lot of value is at stake. So you've got liability issues, and I pointed out about the speed of change in the renewable sector. Governments, until recently anyway, pushing to get the adoption of renewable technology, really, frankly, too quickly. It's untested in many cases, or it has applications that are untested. Say maybe it's deep water offshore, so an offshore wind farm. Easier to construct because you don't have all the planning restrictions to deal with if it's onshore. on land, but technically quite demanding, and so things go wrong. Another thing to keep in mind is that because the transactions tend to be international, they are often cross-jurisdictional. You will be dealing with people whose background is perhaps in civil law, not necessarily common law. So, and indeed, you could indeed get various kinds of Islamic law as well. So there can be different kinds of legal regime that can have an influence on the commercial dispute. And if you're involved as a counsel, or you're involved in some practical matter, maybe you're an arbitrator, it's a good idea to have some awareness of the different systems and the differences between them, because they may have a role in the dispute that arises. Now, the penultimate point I've got on this list here concerns the standard terms. I know you'll be dealing with in international commercial law how models, standardization, and so on and so forth, standard terms. In the energy industry, in the different kinds of energy business, you find that there are very few standard contracts, very, very few. But the pressure to standardize is strong for the obvious commercial reasons. Why?
Because there's conflicts between the laws of countries, different countries.
Yeah, if you can, as it were, take a model contract, even if it's like a skeleton, and you just apply it in any particular case. So if you're in a company and somebody says, "Look, I need a model," and you think, "Well, what am I going to do here?" But you find there are models available online, and you get them. In your own practical situation, you'll find there are unique features of your situation and your problem, whatever that happens to be, your company's problem. The key thing is what you can do is to use the model to start with and build on it. Now, what do you save? Time. It allows you to move, like within 24 hours, to say to your boss, here's a model. Wow, thank goodness. Because they then have an idea about how to move from A to B to C, and whatever. They've got parameters. And you get this in just about any energy industry. And sometimes, with big companies, they have their own models. For the same reasons. It's about money. It saves time, it saves money, it saves employees time. It means you might be just starting in a company, but somebody who's a senior person can come to you and say, "Can you get me a draft contract?" They would expect you to know where to look. They don't expect you to have it necessarily, but they'd expect you to know where to go to get one and get it quickly. And in the oil industry, there are lots of these. And if anything, the problem is there are too many. So you then have to know a little bit to be able to distinguish between one and another. I was involved in one case, and there was there was a model, something called a joint operating agreement, then on the other side there was somebody else who knew something about models, but the argument was about the kind of practice that they said was normal and the kind of practice that I said was normal, and what I was on the side of a government, and they were on the side of a very, very big company. And their model was heavily American. It was heavily U.S. based and a little bit old, but on the other hand, the U.S. has had a long history in the oil and gas industry, very successful over many years. So the age didn't matter, but it was the freedom given to what's called the operator that was a disagreement. So I was saying that's not something that is standard or normal. But they were saying, look, it's always the case. The operator gets lots of freedom to just go ahead. Nobody interferes with the main company in charge, which happened to be the company that was employing the person who was saying this, of course. But anyway, I was saying to the person who was paying for me, I was saying, well, no. They actually have more constraints on how the operator works. But so it was an argument about models. So in that case, there were quite a lot of models available, and so we were able to produce in our respective reports references to those models. But I knew what I was doing, and I was quite confident as well. And the guy who was on the other side, it was two of them, they were also very confident, and we had a disagreement. But there we are. That's up to the arbitrators to sort that one out. So the pressure is clear. It saves time, it saves money if you have models. So companies develop their own models. Associations of companies develop models, and some of them acquire a great deal of influence. In the renewable sector, we don't really have any accepted models yet. It's just a little bit too new as a sector. That's a pity, so I'm told, because it seems that it holds back some of these companies. They would like to have models for the obvious reasons. It saves time, saves money, but there aren't models that are accepted as yet. Okay, last point I wanted to emphasize is the complexity point, and just minor, as you've already heard from what I've been saying, that in this sector the international commercial aspects overlap with not just political matters like in the Straits of Hormuz, but also with the digital transformation, which is this remarkable phenomenon that some people say is like another industrial revolution that's going to be so important. There's that, and then the other one is the climate change problem as well. So that's something I haven't said much about because I thought it'd be a good idea to put that one in brackets. But it just means that I'll give you an idea how contractually this can be important. If you're designing a contract that for our energy commerce, you might want to have a look at ways in which that contract can be tweaked or modified slightly from the traditional type of contract to promote a decarbonization of energy. That's to say, to make the effects greener. Now, that may not involve any extra cost, but it may be something that your company wants to do because your company has a policy which says we've got diversity, equality, and all that sort of thing, but in addition, we're also pro-green. And we're not members of the Greenpeace or anything like this. We're just, as we think it's good to do this. So we would like the contracts to maybe have something in them that shows that our policy, our values are being respected. And there are quite a few companies like that out there. And you may say, well, no, I'm not convinced, Professor Cameron, by this. And I would say, well, okay, maybe your companies don't take that view, but a lot of people that lend to companies, investment banks and so on, may well take that view. They may have people in them who have that pro-green view. So they'll want to see some evidence that the company is doing some tweaking of the contract, just maybe some small things, but it could be contributing to that commitment to climate change mitigation. And I've seen quite a few lawyers writing about how certain contracts can be modified to achieve those objectives. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If they're writing about it, that means that a lot more people are actually doing something, because not every lawyer has time to write anything down, publish articles and so on. Most don't. So there must be quite a lot of this going on there. A second thing is, if you think a few years down the line to a possible dispute that occurs, and maybe it has some environmental impact or a climate-related impact, try and put the present and all the debates that you get at the moment and so on out of your head, and try and think it could be 5, 10 years from now, maybe some dispute arises, there's some climate aspect to it. The judge might well look at your contract and say, why is it that you didn't anticipate these problems to do with the climate? Why did you not do anything in terms of climate change mitigation in that contract? Was there anything you did? And if you say no, he might very well say, well, what can you now expect in terms of winning this case? Because you didn't do anything, in spite of all the debates, everything that was going on, all the public knowledge about the climate, you failed to do anything to anticipate some of these problems. You're now complaining, and you didn't do anything. So you do not have a legitimate expectation to have the damages that you're seeking, or to oppose the damages that the other party is seeking. This kind of thing. So you have to try and think ahead. So oil companies will do this absolutely all the time. They're not stupid. They're partly because oil's a little bit like coal. It's pretty much at the center of the firing line there. What did you do now in your contracts to anticipate something that might happen 10, 15 years from now? It'll come round faster than you think. A lot of these companies are involved in long-term investments, so they have to try and think, what will the world be like at that future time? Okay, so that's the overlap with some of these big problems that are really, happily, we don't have to spend much time on because they really are pretty mega problems, and the solutions are very, very hard to see. But do keep in mind that point I just made. The parties to the contract, one of them or both of them, if we got to say two of them, might well be very dependent on borrowed money. That's very common in renewables, but you borrow as much money as you can. It's a good way of doing well in business. Don't spend your own money, spend somebody else's. But you have to get to the lender and get the lender to give you the money. And that lender will have a big influence on how you go ahead with your contract. I've sat in some of these investment bank offices, and I've heard some of the people there who behave very differently from the sort of people you'd meet in companies. Heard some of them talk about climate change and environment, and they can be very, very committed to it, much more than the company might be. Okay, so energy transactions. Some further points I want to make about these contracts, which have probably wider significance, I hope, for you in your study of international commercial law. I've already said enough, I think, about the electricity expansion and the new energy consumer, these data centers. with potentially destabilizing effects on the grid. That's very much a hot topic at the moment. Then, on that third point is a traditional one. It's not new. If you're designing your contract in the energy sector and the state is a party to it, or it's somehow involved with one of the parties, which would be the case if the state owns maybe the resource in the ground, then how do you manage the risk that at some point the state may decide that it's not going to be a state, it's not going to be a private party, it's going to act like a state. And it may very well impose confiscatory taxation on your project. So it may very well do all sorts of things that are statist and are very, very damaging to your bottom line. This is not unusual. It happens particularly in the natural resources sector, very, very strong, and it's not going to change. It's as strong as it's ever been. In a slightly different way, it happens in the renewable sector. But let me just explain to you how it can happen in renewables. To get your wind or your solar power moving, you have to attract the investment. So you have to put a legal framework in place that basically says to the investors, hey, hello, come here, can we have your money, please? Can you invest in our country? Classic case, Spain. We have the sun. It's fantastic. It's so hot, and we want to have solar parks here. So investors, please come, and they did this. They had like trade shows. It said, please come to Spain, spend your money, and they did. Investors came, and the investors came from many, many different places. They came from the Middle East, they came from the United States, they came from different European countries, they came from Japan, they came from lots of different places. Very international investment mix. Buying or building solar farms or parks in Spain. Very, very successful. But the government had to give incentives, financial incentives, to the companies to come. So they're not going to come just because they get, they receive a postcard from the Spanish government saying, please come and pay us a visit. They get these financial incentives, and then they come, and then they commit their capital to Spain on the basis of terms which have been made very clear and published, and which allow them to project a return over time through that investment. The business model for this kind of renewable investment is what you would get in what's called the utility sector. It's it's very different from oil and gas. But it means that what happens with your investment is that over time, you keep getting almost a guaranteed amount of money. So it's like year in, year out, money keeps coming. It's not huge, but it's very reliable. So it'll be coming over, say, the next 20 years. So you can make a profile of your investment. Very, very nice for bankers. So you go to your bank and you say, I'd like to borrow money for my investment in a solar park in Spain. And they go over the whole thing, and bankers absolutely manic about risk. Lots and lots and lots of risk. I'll come on to risk in a moment. But lots and lots of risk. And tick, 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 tick. No tick, no money for you. So tick, tick, everything has to be ticked. So they go through it all. But what they see from your proposed investment is that they'll get a return as long as the tariffs are stable. they'll get a guaranteed return for the next, say, 20 years. That looks pretty good to them. It's like, you can't fail, really, as long as the sun's shining, and there's no reason to think it won't. So then the government comes along and says, slight problem, because what's happened is we did want a lot of this money to come in, and it's worked very, very well. We've got lots and lots of investment. We're very, very happy. Thank you very much for coming here and giving us your money. But these tariffs that we've agreed on are just involve us subsidizing the tariffs, because we wanted to get this business off the ground. It didn't exist beforehand. We've been, in effect, subsidizing you, and we've worked out that the cost of subsidizing so many of you is enormous. We did have a good system in place. We did assume that maybe over time the technology would become cheaper, and therefore the subsidy could go down. They worked all that out. The problem is the people who came in at the beginning got the big subsidy, and the big subsidy is what was costing them a lot. So along came a government that decided this is unsustainable. They'd recently won an election, so this is something that happens. A new party comes in. This is very much a problem in democracies. New government comes in, says, previous government, well, they made a terrible mess of things. So now we're going to make tough decisions. So they cut the tariff. And that's what they did in Spain. And but they didn't just cut the tariff, they changed the whole system. Cutting a tariff might be bad news. You could argue that the state is allowed to do things like that. But changing the whole system means that the expectations of the investor are completely undermined. And so that's what happened in Spain. And then there was this wave of international arbitrations, which is matched only with Argentina when it had a default way back 20 years ago. No country has ever had so many arbitrations against it as Spain had, all because of its renewable energy actions and its scheme. So if you think, that you'll get fewer disputes in that area, think again. There were some other countries also that had arbitrations, but an interesting feature is that they didn't all adopt the same response that Spain had. Spain was just sweeping the system away. Whereas with certain other countries, they just modified it, and they looked at the law and they said, well, we didn't actually give you guarantees. If you look at this, it's not a guarantee. That's what happened in Italy, and they got away with it. So that in the arbitrations, the arbitration said, if we look at, the arbitrator said, well, if you look at this carefully, I think the Italian state is within its rights to do what it did, and so on. But this can lead to enormous, not only disruption, but also to serious losses on the part of the state. So you have there an example of political risk. The one I haven't mentioned is, of course, the oil sector, where you have a different kind of problem. That what happens? The state owns the resource in the ground. It gives rights to the investor, the foreign investor, and under something called a license or production sharing contract. I'll talk about that in a moment. But they give those rights. Nobody knows initially, right at the beginning, if there's any deposit in there, unless you're in the Middle East. And if in certain Middle East countries, Iraq is a good example, you'd have to be a bit of an idiot not to know that there was oil in the ground, because they've known that the oil was there for 2,000, 3,000 years. It's not, discovering it is not the problem. Developing it might be, producing it, getting the right quality, yes. But in many other places, you don't know. So you take, if you're in maybe India or offshore India or certain parts of Africa, you don't know. So in a way, you're making a bet when you make the contract that that you will actually be successful. The commodity will be there in the ground, and you'll be able to, and the quality will be right. You'll be able to produce it, and you'll be able to make money. So that's a difference in the classical example of an oil industry, where you start and you know nothing. Then, but the geologists might say, we think there is, on the basis of the evidence, we think there is. So they go ahead. Maybe they're lucky, and there's a big discovery. Rajasthan field in Rajasthan province in India, good example, where Kiran Energy found oil. Shell had the rights to the area. Shell geologists said, there's nothing there, forget it. Little company from Scotland comes along and says, we disagree, we'll buy the rights. And then discovers, and it turns out to be a mega field. Now, what then happens, typically, I'm not saying it happened in India, but typically what then happens is the government comes along and says, well, this is remarkable, congratulations, but considering the tax arrangements that we agreed at the beginning, do you not think they're a little bit generous? And of course, the company's going to say, "Oh no, they're very onerous, and you're going to get a good deal." And there tends to be a renegotiation of the arrangement because the parties know more. So they've got a contract, which curiously, a contract that is designed for maybe 25 or 30 years, and it's concluded for that period, even though they don't know if the deposit is actually commercial. So it's one of the curious things, they make the agreement on all sorts of assumptions that may never come to pass. They may work on it for a few years and decide, I'm going to leave it and walk away. But if it does come off, it means you've got a formula in place for dividing the spoils, because once you've actually discovered it, and especially if it's a big one, you don't want to be discussing the division at that time, because the investor will be in a weak position. So that bargaining is very, very important to do, and it's something they will go into in great detail at the beginning. Completely different business model from renewables. Utterly, absolutely different. Making money in renewables is not easy, and the returns are smaller. In the oil industry, somebody once said to me, it's a little bit like gambling. Why? Because you do all that drilling, and a lot of the time it's a failure. But if you strike it big, it's big. And potentially you make a great deal. So it's a very, very different kind of, and it cancels out all your losses. You've got losses here, there, and everywhere. That big one, that's it. When that little company from Scotland did well in India, it eventually was able to just close itself down, to cancel itself, because the people who owned it just took the view, well, okay, let's sell the company and go and live, I don't know, in the Channel Islands or somewhere, and collect classic cars, whatever. You know, it's just a huge amount of money. It may sound a little bit unusual, but I've actually met people who know oil companies who've done just exactly that. So it's a very, very different type of arrangement, and the relationship to the state is also very important, and it's crucial to get that sorted out in the contract. Crucial, right at the very beginning, to anticipate future negotiations. Uganda is another example where something like that happened some years ago now, maybe 15 years ago, where nobody believed there was going to be any oil. Everybody who tried gave up, except maybe some Ugandan geologists who were quite convinced, but they didn't have the money. and then a little company comes along, a little bit like what happened in India, and discovered not a small amount, but a lot, and transformed the country's economy as a result of that. But of course, the first thing that happened was that the government demanded a bigger share of the resource, and the company resisted it. But again, that was ultimately resolved. But one of the features you have there, and this is something I'll come on to, is who is making these contracts? Technology, you need to know, I'll emphasize this. Parties also, who is it you're negotiating with? What is this company like? This has become very important now with the growth of private equity investors. These people do not think in the same way that your big companies do. Not at all. It's a completely different mentality. But take those examples, the Uganda case, the India case. What happened to those companies that made the discoveries? They don't exist. So why don't they exist? It's not complicated. Somebody had to explain it to me because I didn't, academics are a little bit slow. So somebody had to explain it to me. And the guy who was in charge of the company that was in India explained it to me. He just said, look, we create value. That's what we do. Value to me is like money, but anyway, they use a lot of these euphemisms. So you go in, you throw some money at something, you take a bit of a gamble, and if you're successful, you've created all this value. What's the next thing you do? So I think, yeah, that's it. Smart. That's it.
But why not grow that land even more? Why opt to selling it rather than?
Well, what are the options? You could take your discovery, you could develop it, you could put some pipelines in place, you could build and expand. You'd have to invest a lot more money. If you're in Iraq or Algeria, you'd find that there are a huge network of pipelines. Mostly foreign investors have built them, but in conjunction with local companies or state companies. But they're quite complex technologically, and they're very important, but they allow the industry to expand, and you can then expand your oil and gas sector and make it really, really big in the country. The key thing about these companies is that that's not what they do. They don't do pipelines. The moment they've made the discovery, they think, that's fine, we can sell out, and they move on. For me, it was just a bit of a surprise because in my head I had these companies like British Petroleum in my head, and who else? Total in France, Eni in Italy, Exxon, Chevron, and so on. Very, very different. They play a long game. They're around for the long term, and they have huge access to enormous amounts of capital, as well as terrific technological expertise. They're just different. These are but sometimes they look at a place and they say, I'm not going to invest here because there's just not enough money. It doesn't fit with our business plan. We've got lots of choices. We're not going to invest in whatever, I don't know, Gabon, or I'm just thinking of a country, Iceland or whatever. We're not going to invest there because we're just not interested. So they walk. In fact, they're based in Houston or wherever, or Chevron, I think it's San Ramon in California. They're not even going to make the trip. They won't visit your country. So what do you do if you're a government and you want investors? That's when these small companies become important, because they may be the only game in town. Maybe, and like with Uganda, it was stuck. It had nobody. Nobody thought there was anything there. And then it got this outfit, this tiny little company that just was able to borrow enough to drill in the right place to be extremely lucky. That's one example. Cairn in India, another example. Mining natural resources, metals, minerals, and so on, is full of companies that do this. And the word they use when they sell, they discover the mine, or they develop the very, very basics of the mine, then they sell. The word is called flipping. So that is the idiom that they use, that you flip the contract that you've got. You're in quickly, you have a success, silver, gold, whatever, and out you go. Maybe sell to Anglo-American or some other company. It's the same idea that you get in certain types of oil industry. Why does that? Why? Maybe spending a little bit more time on this than I meant to. But if you're the government, you can imagine how difficult it is for you. Sometimes I've worked for governments. You're thinking, look, we're stuck unless we rely on these people. Who's going to invest? But at the same time, when you rely on them and they are successful, you look at them and you think, what are we going to do with these companies? I mean, what are they going to do? They want to sell, and they want to realize the value of our national asset, where on the Toronto Stock Exchange or something. That's where the money's being made. They sell, they make a profit, goodbye. It's slightly, it's not going to make the government too happy. They're sort of happy that there's a discovery, but unhappy that the investor's walking and somebody else is maybe coming in, and they think, well, who's this person, who's this company, so on. You had a question.
It's just that my question is that these actions are usually done under a concession agreement or production sharing. Say concession, so basically the discoveries are under those agreements that are with the state. And usually the state, they do not allow such changing of the investors unless like upon approval or something. So how does this happen on this?
What she's saying is that there'll probably be a provision in the contract that covers something called assignment. So you can't sell your interest to somebody else, to another company, without following the provisions in that assignment agreement, in that assignment provision. Now, that's true. But remember that in these cases, the negotiations were done at a time when your government was desperate. So it may very well have been, the company's been able to get a contract that has provisions in it that are very, very generous. Also, some of them might have just gone ahead and sold it without telling the government. Or maybe they've got permission from somebody in the government who is no longer working for the government, or whatever. They've got a signature on a bit of paper. There are various things that can happen. Your point is quite right, and you can imagine from a state security point of view, you would want to make sure that you knew who was moving in to your country and taking over some of the rights. So yes, that's good that you pointed out that. And I mentioned to you about the identity of the company being particularly important now because of the growing involvement of these private equity funds that have a very different mindset, and they've become very, very common in a number of different areas. Health, provision of health, which is not something we're going to be talking about. But in lots of areas, they just basically decide these are assets, infrastructure assets perhaps, we will buy them. I heard that somebody bought my wife's favorite gym, and there's a chain of gyms, and somebody from I think it was BlackRock just decided they'd buy the chain. And the story behind that was just one of those strange things. This person in the company bought the chain as a present for his daughter. It was one of these things. They had so much money that they're just constantly buying assets all over the place. It can be anything. But the key thing is they'll probably have it for 3 or 4 years, and if that doesn't turn a profit, they sell it. And if it does turn a profit, they might still sell it and just realize that profit and walk away and move on to something else. And somebody once said to me, what you have to understand when you're dealing with people like that, this is important for the parties to the contract, you have to understand that those people will not deal with you in the same way that somebody in a big energy or natural resource company investor will deal with you. Anglo-American BHP built on it was just Anglo-American headquarters still in London, but it could be Exxon, Chevron, whatever. Different. So these people, big companies, they negotiate in a certain way. Your private equity person, maybe when they're doing a deal with you, might basically have this situation. Instead of a successful deal, meaning that they get a small pay increase or a pat on the back from the senior manager, you've done a very good job, Grace or Mary or whatever your name is. You've done a great job. Thank you. Good, and we'll give you a small pay increase. And you feel good. You think, yeah, sure, I've done well in the company, and who knows, my future might be quite good in this company. I like the company, it's good. With these private equity people or hedge funds, you might find it's simply like this. If we do this deal, I get a bonus. Now, I don't get a small bonus, I get a very, very big bonus. I become rich. So my way of dealing with you will be very different. If this deal doesn't work, I'm going to be very, very nasty. I'm going to be super nasty, and I don't care. So you're suddenly dealing with a very, very different type of person, and a lot of them around. You know, this is London. There are here, I assure you, there are quite a lot of these people around. That it's because of the greed factor, so that's why the due diligence when you're doing your work into the parties to the contract becomes very, very important. You need to be sure you know who you're dealing with and who's behind them as well. When I was involved with some renewables cases, I was quite surprised. I was dealing with, as an arbitrator, companies with names I'd never heard of. And then I found they may be controlled by some British company. It could be, say, Prudential, some massive conglomerate that just happened to have bought this particular solar park interest in Spain, something like that. So you need to, then the thinking of the ultimate owner becomes quite important in trying to work out how that contract is going to perform over time. And international investment has become really a lot more complicated. And increasingly it's becoming more political as well. So you really have to look very closely to see who's there. That may not be your decision about what happens next, but if you're the legal advisor, your job is to get the information and then pass it on to the person who will then decide either to do something about it or not to. But you have done your job, you've informed them. So that's it. Right, how are we doing on time? Oh, my goodness. So can I just get to the end of this slide, and then I'll maybe have a stop. As you can see, sometimes I talk a little bit too much. But then that point about gas contracts, we've talked about renewables. I've mentioned about oil and the specificities there. I'll deal with gas primarily next week because it's to do with transportation. But I think it's one of the features about gas that's so odd is the fact that there's no international gas price. If you look at all this discussion about the oil price, it's all going up and oil is going to be $100 a barrel or above, they're all referring to things like the price of oil according to a US indicator or a UK indicator called Brent. So they're saying that the Brent price of crude is whatever. So they've got these international markets, markers. Whereas when you get to gas, there's none of that. So how do you define your gas price? Answer is, in your contract, you will have a formula which explains how the price of your gas in your contract is going to be decided upon. And this is something that, honestly, it really requires a lot of serious thinking to understand. If you've done any algebra, mathematics, it's fine, you're safe. If you're the normal, typical person who does law, like me, you look at those numbers and you think, oh my goodness, it's like a formula, and it's just really is scary stuff. And unfortunately, it's extremely important. It just is unbelievably important. They've got numbers that have maybe something like 0.0001, and that 001 can be about millions and millions, so you must understand it. So it's a real challenge, but that is one of the features that you get in gas contracts, gas sale and purchase contracts, and it's crucially important, and it's also, as you can imagine, a source of many disputes. And over time, as the market changes, and I'll say a few things about this later, as the market changes, one of the parties might say, look, we're losing money. Look at the gas price. It's a way down. It's not at the moment, but it's a way down. Gas is flooding the market. I don't want to buy your gas. Can I be released from this contract, please? Because I'm losing money. I'm having to pay you a huge amount of money, and if I go to the spot market, I can pay much, much less. And of course, if you're the seller, your instinct is to say, no, please pay me because I like money. I like it. I'm happy. It's very good. And you get more and more money and say, no, we've had enough. We're going to arbitration. So it could be like that. But on other occasions, you could activate a price review clause or a price reopener, which you will never get in your oil contract, but you will get in a gas contract. You get this provision that legally allows the parties to the contract to review the whole price formula, maybe after 2 years or 3 years, something like that. But the wording is going to be very important. But it is possible to review that price. That doesn't mean to say that it goes amicably in the future. It sometimes doesn't. That's why you have quite big arbitrations. If there's a dispute, what happens? Well, I've already told you that. The favored method is arbitration. And we're going to talk about that later in the course, so I'm not going to say any more about it. And I think I've already dealt with that last point about renewable energy, so I don't need to add anything there. So you see, we've got a few sectors here that are all different and are all immensely important for international commercial law, but they're different. I haven't said anything about nuclear, a little bit more niche. But these ones are all very, very important. And even more important is the time, and it's time well after 1 hour when I said I was going to stop. So I'm going to stop now for a break. I think Professor Arnott said I'm allowed to give you 15 minutes, but probably what I should do is give you the authorization code before, unless you don't want it. Yeah, right. Okay, so the authorization code, I feel like I'm reading out the numbers on a lottery here. So it's GM, as in General Motors, hyphen SK, and then hyphen IP. I think it's an IP, not one. I think it's what? It's what?
IP.
IP as in intellectual property. Have you got that? Do you want me to say that again? GM SK IP. Okay, 15-minute break, and then we'll have a shorter second session. Thank you. Okay, well, I must have put you to sleep there, or you've been using. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was good. Gee, it works really well. No, this is actually for me. Happy about this because this is I love energy too.
Okay,
actually
good,
some of my
good.
favorite classes in law school in Texas were around sort of fish.
Okay, okay.
Huge fan of Dan Bergen's book. So yeah, and actually the context of how I did the first half of the course,
Right.
this is working really nicely.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So, no,
okay.
I'm- this is good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy, Douglas. That's good. That's good. So, oh, please go ahead. I'm sorry. Am I blocking you?
Sorry, actually, I'm unable to log in.
Hello, hello. What I'm going to do is take this off so that I don't have to broadcast what I'm saying. Okay, go ahead.
I want to ask you something. It's not really part of the class, but you seem to be very knowledgeable in terms of the energy sector. So I'm doing a dissertation about SPVs in oil and gas sector and the issues of SPVs and whether there are issues. And I still didn't identify the issue basically. And I was mainly looking forward to assess the protection they provide for the investors. So I was just wondering if you have any resources in this specific area that might help me get somewhere. Where I can start.
SPVs. Have a look at that source book. Download it, chapter 5. Have a look there to see. I think I've discussed SPVs in connection with joint ventures. Have a look and see if there's something there. It sounds to me as if you're going to have to try and focus a little bit more on something. It's always very difficult with a dissertation or essay. The challenge is to get the focus because you tend to go too wide. And it's quite difficult.
Too narrow for a dissertation.
Tell me again.
I mean, do you think that for the dissertation is 1,000 words, so do you think this topic might be too narrow for a 10,000 word dissertation? Well, I really want to focus, I want to do something, first I'm studying commercial and corporate law, so I want to do something corporate, but I still want to be in the oil and gas sector, because my home country is an oil and gas producer, so this is what's going to help me in my career. So I figured that it's really interesting because it's relevant, it's something that is highly demanded by investors one day.
Yeah.
That
Makes sense. Yeah.
projects.
Do you want to send me an email with maybe the title, yeah, and maybe 2 or 3 sentences, not much, and then let me think about it. Sometimes I'm better when I see things written down, and I'll try and think of a response, whether it's too narrow or too wide. Okay, I'm in the system, so camera, have a look.
And
All right.
do you have any do you have thought of any relevant resources? I would be really
Just add that to the message. Yeah, okay.
very much.
Pleasure. Hello.
I had a question. When governments have given out these contract to what the rights to take out these resources and everything over the years, how can they take out without anything saying that they have something like that regarding a contract?
Okay.
The government gave them the rights in the first place
Yes.
about everything. So how can you open it something in this contract?
Well,
Like they might have some claiming that.
yeah, it's usually it can be difficult. You could say the government, if it wants to be really nasty, could say there has been environmental damage. So you're in breach of the clause that deals with environmental protection. I think this has happened recently in a case. I'm trying to think which one it was. But they just argue that something has not been done properly, and then they impose a very big fine. Or they hold up approval of a license, or an extension or something, so that way you get a delay. And the company, yeah, and maybe the government might corrupt. It might, it's very common. They may want something. They have to negotiate quietly, privately. What do you want? And then, it may be that they bothered employed in the sector, and they've got some angry communities, so they'd like extra money to pay off. It could be like that. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Just don't get angry, just do a deal, keep it quiet. If there's enough money available, then it should be easy. The question is set precedent. And once you start giving them money, the case is not good. You have to be careful.
If the government over the years finds interest in finding issues in the country, so that financial issues out of that.
Yeah, sure. That's it.
So we will be discussing about this in further in the class, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah, sure.
Thanks, Professor.
Okay, everybody, I think we probably should get started. I think there'll be a few more people just coming back, but by and large, I think we should get moving. I've got rather a lot on my various slides, so some of them I may go through rather quickly. I thought it might help you if I summarize some of the features of the energy business that you might like to keep in mind, just when you're looking at any of the sectors. And so I put up eight features which strike me as being important. They're not exhaustive. I'm sure there's some others, and you can give different weight to some of these factors. But these ones at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, 9. Here we go. Duration. Often these contracts are long-term. They used to be normally long-term, period. Now that's much more nuanced. Some are short-term, especially in the gas business, because you have hubs that have been established in the United States and in Europe for gas trading, and you can buy your gas. And there are also hubs in Asia that allow you to buy gas at a spot price, and that is a short-term contract that you would have there. But if you have, say, with LNG, we'll deal with that next week. But with LNG, those contracts are often long-term, but the terms vary quite a bit inside them. And I think if you can imagine with your cargo of, I hope the technology I'll just be very, very brief on this. Technology with liquefied natural gas, you liquefy the gas. You have a very, very expensive infrastructure you put in place liquefy the gas that you've got at the ground. You liquefy it at the terminal, say in Nigeria. You liquefy it, it shrinks. You put it on a huge ship and take it right across the world, maybe to Spain. From Nigeria. Spain has a regasification terminal, so you then take the gas off and take the liquefied gas off, which is very, very cooled, and so on. We can go into that next week. You then regasify it. So this is enormously expensive. So you're talking about billions of dollars that go into infrastructure. But the point is, when the boat is moving around the water, taking that Nigerian LNG to Spain, the question arises, who owns this? Who owns this gas? And does the owner have the right to maybe sell it? Not when it's arrived in Spain, but when it's on the way to Spain. What happens if the price suddenly starts to go up and they think they can get a buyer who will pay more somewhere else? Do they have a right to redirect the boat, not to Spain, but I don't know, to somewhere in Japan? Maybe a Japanese buyer or a Korean buyer might say, we're desperate. We've got to have a supply of gas. We will pay X amount more per cubic meter. Can you give it to us? Well, some ships have contracts that allow them to redirect the gas to another buyer. So that's something that we can have a look at next week. But that's another aspect of the duration issue, which is slightly different, but it's quite a lively aspect. State involvement, I've already talked to you about that. I'm not going to add anything at the moment. Complexity, in the different energy sectors, there are different kinds of complexity. I used to study nuclear energy law. I found it very, very interesting. I gave up because I just realized I wasn't any good at physics. And at a certain point, you can't understand the law because you need to move into understanding the physics aspect of the business. And I don't know how many lawyers I've met who've done things like they've gone on courses to understand non-law aspects of the legal work. You know, they can't understand, why does the contract why is it organized this way and not that way? Because logically, it should be another way. Well, the answer is it's because of technical factors. But if you don't understand the technical factors, you won't understand how the contract works. Unfortunately, your client will pick up on this. So your client might well want to educate you by saying, well, come and visit our installation and we'll give you some lectures on this. So the complexity is something which you should keep in mind. And I'm sure you get it in lots of different areas of law, as well as this. Scale, often the scale of the company you deal, one of the parties might be huge, like the company may be Exxon. The scale of the resource may be huge. There are all sorts of, the scale can be very big. You also find actually in an arbitration the scale of damages that can be awarded in natural resources cases can be completely without precedent. I mean, it's so incredibly high. There was a case involving a Russian company called UKOS. The damages that were awarded against the Russian Federation were, I think, something like $50 billion. But once you start adding the interest onto that, I think at the moment it's now something like 65 billion. So this is crazy. And then there was another case involving Pakistan that was mining, and that went against Pakistan, and that was an extraordinary amount of money that was involved there. So many billions. Then there was another one that went against Nigeria, and it was discovered that there was some fraud in the case. So fortunately for Nigeria, the case failed. But the arbitral award, which had very distinguished people sitting on the panel, including Lord Hoffman, said that Nigeria had failed in the case, and it would lose and had to pay many billions of dollars in damages to a company which had actually not invested anything in the country. So it was very strange decision. And part of the problem was that Nigerian lawyers hadn't defended the case well enough. But anyway, they were lucky because the case went to a court, and Justice Robin Knowles, I think, was the leader on this, and he said he dismissed the award. Said Nigeria should not pay this, and but that again, you just get numbers that are very, very, very big, very, very big in the energy sector. That's partly why energy disputes tend to be very, very well known, because some of them involve astronomical amounts of money. Market volatility, we see that at the moment with the oil price. Today, it's gone, as I understand it, it was at one point it was $114. It's now down to around about 90. So that's all in one day. So you get that kind of volatility. Very, very hard to get your contract in place and to keep it stable, which in a way involves defying reality with these commodity prices, which are not always crazy like they are at the moment. But your job as a lawyer, in a way, is to almost like to hold back time, to do something unreal, and make sure that once the parties have agreed on something, it's not going to change, because otherwise you can't do business. You can't engage in large-scale investment without some certainty. And that's your job, provide that certainty in the face of quite a lot of market volatility. If you say, well, what's the market volatility in renewables? Well, one feature would be to look at the cost of solar panels, and you compare them now with what they were, say, 15 years ago. 15 years ago, they'd be very expensive. Now, they're very, very cheap. Well, that's partly because in China, they could be produced very, very easily, but also partly because the technology is much improved, and it's more widely available. So it's possible to do different things with it. But that does mean, as you know, if the subsidy that was given to one of these solar investments was very high, then the system would have had to have something built into it that allowed that subsidy to go down over time as the technology became established and cheaper. Okay, international. This is crucial. That a lot of countries, and the United Kingdom is definitely one of them, I can assure you, they don't have enough domestic capital to do what they'd like to do. So the capital available in many countries is just insufficient to achieve the objectives. So you need to attract foreign investment. With that comes risk. Who are your investors? They come from abroad. You could say something slightly silly like, we are a welcoming people and all this stuff. That's fine, but some people out there are not nice. Some people are greedy, some people are selfish, some people are quite capable of being corrupt, or they may even be criminals in other ways. So you have to be careful to set up pre-qualification systems so that the people that are coming in are people that you have vetted carefully and checked, tick, 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 all the boxes. They're legitimate investors. You don't want anybody coming in that is basically involved in money laundering. And what?
It's basically KYC.
What?
It's basically KYC. Know your clients.
Yes.
Procedure.
Yes, sure. And this is very important. There's so much people out there really who may not be the kind of investors you want. Also, in some countries, they have difficult relations with others. I don't need to give you any examples. They may just take the view, hey, we just don't want relations with country X, Y, Z. Or they may say, these resources that the investors want access to involve state secrets. Now, not many countries do this, but some do. So especially on oil and gas, they may say this is the geological data is secret, it's classified. You get that in some of the Hollywood movies, it's classified, this kind of thing. Well, some countries are like that, but you step out of line and you are seen to be giving that classified information to the wrong people, and there's a knock on the door, the police are taking you away, handcuffs, and you're off into some prison that is probably not like the Four Seasons Hotel. It's going to be not nice, and you're wondering, hey, can somebody get me out of here? I was in London's such an interesting place. I was talking to one woman who was a senior counsel for a mining company, and she said, I'm really busy at the moment because two of our people were put are in prison in this country that we're working in, and basically the military had taken over, and they just said the previous government, hopeless, bad deal with your company, we want to change it. And what you're doing is you're taking a lot of gold out of our country, and we think we should have a much, much better deal. So basically, can you sort it? But you see, these are military people. So at the same time, they said, and by the way, that guy and that guy are going to prison. Get it done now. That was it. Off they were into sort of prison with rats and all sorts of things like that. Horrible. So her concern was, what about our employees? And you can imagine nobody senior from the company was going to be making a visit to the country until this is sorted out. So that's the reality of working in some of these countries. And on the other hand, if you look at, say, the gold price, you can imagine there were a lot of happy faces in that company when I made my visit. And it wasn't because I'd arrived. It was, they were just aware of the gold price at that time was really, really, really good. So although those poor employees were having a difficulty and they were trying very hard to get them out, I think they had British passports, but I don't think that was going to help them. Embassies are not very good at getting people out of that situation. So you see that the international dimension is very, very important in different ways. Strategic concerns, state secrets, and so on, very, very important. And all of this is getting more sensitive rather than less as governments get more and more prickly in their relations with each other. Asymmetry. Sometimes in the negotiations, you find that the people that on each side are maybe not equally knowledgeable or skilled in dealing with the problems. Okay, so this is particularly bad in the natural resources sector, where you can imagine the foreign investor is only doing one thing. They specialize. Sometimes it's very good to be in the private sector. You focus on one thing. I want money. I want to make a profit. What are we doing? Making money. That's very, very clear, very clear. If you're on the government side, you're never as clear as that. You've probably got policy objectives. Often they don't make sense. They contradict each other. And you may be aware of it, but you're thinking, well, what can I do? It's my job. What am I supposed to do? Go to the Prime Minister and say, look, some of these policies are crazy? I don't think so. I won't be in this job for long. And they're not joking. So, it's complicated. So you're having a bargaining, and one side has people. I'll give you an example to slightly out of this sector. Microsoft negotiating antitrust issues with the European Commission in Brussels. Quite different example from anything we're talking about today. How does Microsoft do the business? They negotiate. Maybe it takes a month. People get tired. They're negotiating, they're very tired. What does Microsoft do? Woof, a new team gets flown in, and they continue negotiations. What happens when people get tired? Bring in somebody new. Go and have a rest. What happens if you're the European Commission? It's like being a government. You can't have, if you're tired, that's too bad. We need you. We don't have more staff, so you have to keep negotiating. Maybe you become sloppy. It's not actually your fault, it's just the way it is. Asymmetry, okay? Expertise, knowledge, all sorts of things. This is partly why so many governments in the natural resources sector are very prickly about foreign investors and have this sense that they're being used or abused. Because, frankly, some of the time, that's true. You know, some of the time, it's true. And often, or not all the time, but often, there is that asymmetry in the relationship. And I don't know how you deal with it. It's often they can hire foreign experts. I've been involved sometimes for governments. I used to, not now, in that respect. And you go there and you help to educate the government negotiators so that they negotiate with the private sector more efficiently. This used to be quite common. A really serious side is on the tax side, where you have, unfortunately, a lot of the international accountancy firms do work for the big internationally operating private firms. So it's quite hard for you, if you're on the government side, to find anybody that if you've got some spare cash, to hire, to pull in, who's not conflicted. You want Deloitte, you want EY, whatever. They all work for big companies. Maybe the companies are on the other side. It's quite tricky. But in principle, you could buy in expertise. But you also have to be smart enough to understand what you don't know. You know, and I'm afraid some people, you know, they just don't get this message. It's like, you know, we're a sovereign state. We don't need any help. We can do it. Oh, dear me, you've had it. It's if you go that route. But I've seen that. It's a pity because you're out of your league with a lot of these. So that asymmetry is common, and it's a source of the kind of unease and amongst the parties that leads to conflict, that leads to disputes. So that's a feature that's very common. How do disputes get resolved? I mentioned arbitration because it's supposed to be cheaper. Maybe it is. It's supposed to be quicker. Generally speaking, it probably still is. And private, definitely. It's much more low-key, behind closed doors than going through the courts. And one of the problems you've got, just spelling this out, and then I'm going to stop on this point. Why is arbitration, international arbitration, nearly always demanded by the international investors? Because they can't trust the courts. Now, you might say, oh, that sounds like something that's negative towards the global south. No. Could you trust the courts in many parts of, excuse me, Douglas, the United States? Could you trust the courts in Germany, federal form of government? Different. They've got a lot of independence. So the judges can be very different. So it's a general worry that if you go to the courts, you don't know what's going to happen, and they could be biased. If it's in Nigeria, for example, is the court really going to make a decision that means that the Nigerian State Petroleum Company, NNPC, is going to lose money, billions and billions of money? Is that a decision you're going to make? The answer is not this side of heaven. It's just not going to happen. So you know which way the court's going to go. So that's why arbitration, get it in the contract. You know, even if you never use it, no arbitration, no deal.
That's what I wanted to say, that most of the times the courts of a certain country would be biased not to rule positive for the government against the major like oil investor.
Yes.
I mean, the investor would most of the times always be in the wrong in the eyes of the courts of the certain government. Plus, then there are issues of forum shopping and other litigation issues that courts may have.
That's right. There's probably going to be a bias on the part of the courts against the companies. And she was mentioning forum shopping. Possibly the companies they might view the companies as having. How are we going to fit this one in? The companies have chosen a certain forum for their arbitration for treaty purposes, which is to their advantage. Venezuela being an example of that, where Exxon had a case against Venezuela many years ago now, but Exxon had a treaty case against Venezuela. Well, Venezuela does not have a treaty with the United States. It hasn't had a treaty with the United States, a bilateral investment treaty, for many years, but didn't need one because Exxon simply moved to the Netherlands and set up a company, a small company, not quite a letterbox company, but it's the same idea, a subsidiary with a few people, in order to be able to sue Venezuela from the Netherlands, which does have a treaty. So that's called forum shopping. So these sort of practices, but you didn't mention anything about tax, because there's a lot of tax shifting, transfer pricing, all sorts of deals that are done. Again, your judge in the local court will be aware of that companies are very good at finding ways of mitigating their tax payments, internationally operated companies. So there's a lot of the mindset of your local judge that will not be favorable to...
question though, isn't the tax clauses specifically mentioned in the contract, generally in the upstream sector of
No,
energy?
usually not. Usually you've in a production sharing contract you get some tax arrangements. Yes, in license or concession arrangements, usually you get a separate tax law.
Separate.
Yeah, because they.
I was just talking about the upstream mainly because that's what I remember and from the contracts that I've seen.
Yeah. Okay. So it's and again the amounts involved can often be incredibly high, really very large amounts of money, because usually with tax avoidance, when you discover it, it's happened for many years, and so the amount of tax you might be wanting to recover is very large indeed. Okay, this is just a little bit of slightly messy slide, but ignore the bit at the top. I don't know, that's a formatting thing. I couldn't fix that. But just as a kind of like a checklist for you, you might find it useful in looking at any of these sectors. Tech, is there a tech aspect I need to know about? Whether it's renewables, remember, wind isn't the same as solar. Wind onshore is not the same as wind offshore, and so on. Tech, is there something I need to know? Who are the parties to the contract? You need to do your homework, make sure you know who they are. And are there any standard contracts that are operating in this area? In other words, okay, there's no international law that says this is the contract I have to use. But if I do a comparative exercise and I look at different models or published contracts, and there is actually a website called www.resourcecontracts.org that publishes real contracts in the natural resources sector. Now, they may have some models, but the key thing is they've got hundreds of real contracts. So you can find out what contracts that are used in different countries. It's a bit incomplete because you know, a lot of people don't have an interest in making these things public. So that's www.resourcecontracts.org. And you can then just put in a country and put in a type of contract and get information. Okay, so models, are there any templates? This is useful to know about. And indeed, there's an article I should probably put up or give a reference to all about models. What are the risks in this sector? I think the next slide's all about risk. Oh yeah, that's right. Risks, massive risks everywhere. So here you've got construction risks, completion. This happens also if you buy a property, maybe a new build property. Is it going to be completed by the builder, or are you going to be left with a half-completed building, flat or house? I've had people ask me that sort of question. And I used to be fairly cavalier and say, oh, I trust them, which I would never do now. But sometimes in your life you make these, you behave in a way that's, in retrospect, rather naive. But construction, you can't do this in business, it's especially if it's a lot of money. So is this project, imagine it, if it's a nuclear project, have you ever heard of a nuclear project being completed on time? And on budget? I don't believe it. It just doesn't happen. And they're way over budget usually. And sometimes you're 10 years late, that sort of thing. It's extraordinary. Operational risk, does it work in the way we thought or not? Is it likely to work in the way we want? Revenue or market risk, are we going to actually get the money out of this? This is your lender asking the questions. If the company isn't doing it, the lender's going to be doing it. Is there a legal or a regulatory risk? If you look at the contract, there's a government party that's on the other side. One of the things you're going to look at and find out, ask, does the government, in fact, let's look at the wider legal regime. Does the government have much discretion? Because in certain countries, discretion, as I found out when I used to do legal drafting, when I started out, very academic, oh yeah, good, oh, wonderful. Everything had to be nice. And I made such a great mistake. I remember I thought the government has to have discretion to decide on this. I thought it was good because I was very pro-government. And somebody said to me, do you not understand what will happen? You've put that provision in there. Do you understand? It's a kickback. They're just going to ask for money. And in some countries more than others, but in any country, you're putting civil servants who are not well paid into the path of temptation. So if somebody says, well, yeah, I can give you the license, but pause. And, you have to fill in the space yourself, and whatever it is. Anyway, that sort of thing. So discretion is one of the things that your lawyer will go for very quickly. Does the government have discretion to give a permit, a license, whatever? And on the permitting point as well, you've got maybe your energy part of the government. Great. What about the environment part? Do you think they like each other? Almost certainly not. They don't get on, they're competing with each other. So one may give you a license and the other one might just say, sorry, the license is not valid. This kind of thing. And so you can't, the investor can't go ahead. It's dreadful. Environmental risk. Again, keep in mind what I said about the climate change, because I have noticed that more and more people are looking at contracts, commercial contracts, and asking, are they being made in a way that shows that the people concerned are taking seriously commitments to decarbonization. Now, maybe the people asking these questions are NGOs, civil society groups, whatever, but do remember in the age of the internet, if those contracts look as if they're not environmentally sensitive and they get on the internet and in the public domain, then they connect to a lot of voters or a lot of citizens, and it doesn't look good. And it may be that there's a natural disaster, an oil spill or whatever, and at that moment, you can start releasing this information and say, well, the company, look, it did this, and it failed to do that, and it's terrible. And nobody's interested in being supportive of the company at that moment. So environmental risk is something that your banker is going to be looking at and taking very seriously. They're not thinking it's good if you're concerned about the environment. They're thinking, listen, we might have some really nasty publicity here down the line. A while ago, there was a big oil spill. What was it? Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of whatever it is now being called. It was a big oil spill. It was BP that was in charge of the ultimate commissioner of the rig, Deepwater Horizon. But with all of that was going on, a huge amount of publicity about it. We don't need to focus on that. There was another spill in Brazil. Not long afterwards, Chevron was involved in that. And a huge amount of publicity about it. It was a tiny spill. But in a way, the public opinion had changed because of what happened in America with in the Gulf of Mexico, and everybody was failing to make any distinction between a big spill and an oil spill. Every spill was big as far as they were concerned, and the media didn't draw any distinctions. So what happened in Brazil is that the federal authorities, see, this is where you have to be careful, federal authorities in charge, got the police out, went to Chevron offices and arrested all the senior management and put them in prison. Now, then the national government had to quickly, thinking, my goodness, what's this going to do for our investment image, had to come in and get these guys out. But perceptions, very, very, very important. So that risk is something very, very serious. Good.
This is more about media literacy.
More about what?
Media literacy and how the public perceives some things. So it's not about the risk entirely, from the company. It's more about how the public and the media
see the risk.
And perceives.
You're quite right. The problem is that has reality too. That perception, public perception, because of the way the media work. I'm not meaning that in a critical way of media. I'm just meaning that many people have access to media, which allow that image to go. So you got that cost increase risk, financing risk, force majeure risk, credit risk, input risk, the risk that the necessary inputs will not be available in the quantities required or at the price that was expected. So there are all these risks, and they are ones that have to be anticipated in the design of the contract. So if we move on to have a look at the oil and gas contracts, I've already anticipated some of this, so I'll be fairly quick in going through it. And I do want to say a few things especially about renewables. The oil and gas, an important thing to keep in mind is that they are found in the same way. You may find you get more in one place you get more gas than oil, but it's the same process of discovering with oil and with gas. The moment you discover lots of gas, then basically everything changes, because gas is, from a chemical point of view, a completely different resource, and getting it out involves infrastructure. that is very, very expensive. And for that reason, there tends to be in the contract, there's a provision which says if you find gas, then the following procedure applies. If you find oil, that's just, as it were, skip this provision and read on. Gas, separate provision, it says, basically, you can take your time and work out a plan for the development of the gas field. And that means you're also going to have to go and talk to lenders to arrange finance to build pipelines. You might decide you want to go the liquefied natural gas route, but one way or the other, you're going to have to spend a lot of money on heavy pipelines. Gas is dangerous, it explodes. So they need to be pretty strong pipelines. Oil pipelines are uncomplicated. In a lot of ways, the oil industry is actually very simple. It's a very simple kind of industry, but gas is not. You need a lot of engineers around to advise you to make sure everything's going to be okay. So in the contract, different provision, especially maybe it says you're allowed to apply for, in Australia, they would say a retention license. The license, that means that during the time that you're developing your gas plan, no, but the clock is not ticking about losing the overall contract. Okay, you've got the contract and it's got a specific duration, but you can, as it were, take time out to develop your gas field. You didn't know you would find gas, but you found it, and so you apply for a retention license. Government will be very happy to give it to you because it wants the field developed. Okay, so. So they're always marketed separately, but they're found together. Long history, oil and gas and international commerce. And here we've got the very, very specialist technical knowledge. Engineers, very important. Geologists, very important. Then the parties themselves, usually they are, especially if it's gas, they are those big heavyweight companies. And often it will be in conjunction with, say, a domestic company, because maybe they want some of the gas to be used domestically, especially for electricity. So you may find that the other party to your gas agreement is the local electricity company. And it may be state-owned as well. Here we go. Contracts, the type of contract you get. In petroleum, it's hydrocarbons, petroleum. In Spanish or Latin America, there was hidrocarburos. In some other places, the petroleum is oil, and strictly speaking, I would say petroleum is oil and gas. But you have to check your definitions in the agreement about what, in the particular country, what applies. So you've got your license, which has an odd contractual character. It's not a dog license. It's not a sort of typical, it's not a television license. It's not one of these things that's like an administrative permission. It is basically a combination of an administrative instrument and a contractual one. So it's got a quasi-contractual character. If it doesn't, nobody's going to invest. It needs to have, the investor needs to have some assurance that the rights are almost contractual. Yet there is this granting, which it makes sense within public law. Okay, so there's that mixture. That applies in the UK, that applies in Norway, it applies in many places. And it's based on what used to be called the concession. But nowadays that sounds a bit neo-colonialist, so people tend not to use it so much. And an alternative that was developed a long time ago by Indonesia was called the production sharing contract. Very, very popular type of arrangement now. The oil comes out the ground. Then there's a sharing of the resource between the government and the company. Good example would be, say, Algeria. the oil comes out. Sonatrach, the state company, in a country with a state company, Sonatrach says, we want the oil, but it doesn't share. It gets all the oil, and it takes the oil that will go eventually to the investor, the foreigner, and it puts the whole lot into its pipelines, because Algeria is fairly advanced, quite independent. So it takes all that oil in its pipelines, and it gets to delivery point. We'll talk about this next week as well, free on board and all sorts of things like that. But the delivery point, then the company, maybe it's a company I used to have some dealings with called Anadarko, gets its share at the delivery point. And immediately that oil goes onto the boat. It's the transport, whatever the transport vehicle is. It's a pretty big vehicle. But as they explained to me, between the delivery point where the state company hands over its share of, that takes physical, it says goodbye to its to the company share and gives it to the company, and it goes on board. By the time it's got on board, the company has probably sold it. In other words, in the old days, you'd use a telex. You'd basically, you get your share, but you don't hold on to it. Why? What's the company doing? It's in business. Its job is to make money. So what has it been doing? It's not a sovereign state, just it works jointly in a joint venture with the state company, but the state company says, we are independent, we are a sovereign state, and part of it means that we will build our own pipelines, we'll have our own infrastructure, and give jobs to our own people, and we will take your oil to the delivery point. Then it's at the port, the sharing is really instant. Sonatrach takes its share, private investor takes its share, private investor transfers it to the boat, but the telex has gone off, and by the time it reaches the boat, so to speak, it's gone, already been sold to somebody else, because the company's in the business of making money. It doesn't want to hold on to the oil. Why should it? It wants to sell it. It wants to monetize it. And so that's what it's done. So it's all very, very, very fast. So that contract is the vehicle for the company to make money. And for the state, in that particular case, it wanted to have all those pipelines. The private investor could have built them, maybe it did, but it did them as a contractor, not as an owner. And I think they had some pretty good engineers, a lot of really good people. And in plenty parts of the Middle East, that you find the geological engineers among the local people are first class. Okay, standardization, common. I mentioned there this AIEN, Association of International Energy Negotiators. If you want to get hold of model contracts, they have a lot. Unfortunately, you have to be a member of the organization, but they have very, very cheap rates for students. I think it's $30 or something. Then you can download all these agreements. Oil and gas contracts, duration could be 25 years or more. I've talked about the bargaining element. Bargaining changes over time. Remember, this is sometimes called the obsolescing bargain. You make an agreement at the beginning, but over time, as knowledge changes, and as the company, or maybe several companies, invests, commits capital, the balance of power shifts to the state. And so that's when the state has a better negotiating position to revise the deal later on, if they're successful with the resource. A way of trying to stop this in the contract is to introduce something called a stabilization clause. That is very common in oil or petroleum contracts. Remember, petroleum contracts also apply to gas at the exploration development stage. But gas has got that special provision. If it's found, certain things happen, and the time frame's different. So, so you've got that worry on the part of the company that the deal will not be kept in the long term. So the company may insist on a stabilization clause. Governments don't like giving them, and sometimes they won't give them. Other times they define them in a certain way, and I could talk to you for 3 hours about how different they are, these stabilization clauses, but we don't have time for that. They used to have something called a freezing clause, and you still have international lawyers who are obsessed with this. It's the only kind of stabilization they understand. They're a little bit slow, but freezing just basically says, this is the deal that we did, we struck it, it will not be changed. The law that applies to this deal is the law at the time that we signed the deal. Okay, so it's frozen, the law governing the contract. In a sense, practically this is rather hard to implement. It's also a little bit unfair, and it doesn't have many supporters. However, another way of defining, of writing it, is to say, to have wording along the lines, if the state, if the government, if the host state, whatever words used, decides at a later date to modify the contract, or in the event that, then there's a trigger. If something happens to trigger state action, then and the state does something that's economically damaging to the investor, then if damage is caused, got a result, next thing is that the parties will agree to meet at the earliest opportunity and discuss how the arrangement can be returned to the original conditions that the parties met. So you've got an agreement to meet and discuss. The wording might even be to agree. It depends. The wording's very, very important in that case, because as you can probably see, it's a bit weak. If somebody's determined not to go along with it, they can do that. So well, there we are. We've got stabilization clauses. I'll put some material up on that, and that way you can have a look at them. Let's move on. Ignore the last bit. It's incomplete. Joint ventures, very, very important in the oil and gas business, because companies like to spread the risk. There are too many things that can go wrong, so they agree to resort to develop the resource jointly. This will not extend to marketing. There are many, many models available about joint operating agreements. These joint bidding and joint operating agreements, there are many examples of them. The important thing legally is it's an unincorporated venture. That's to say, it is not a partnership, and it's not a single company. Okay? It's extremely important to understand that. A lot of that's to do with antitrust law. And that's partly why the marketing becomes a real problem. They don't want to touch that. So one party in the joint venture is appointed as what they call operator. The others may contribute not technical skills necessarily, and but money. So they get voting rights as through something called an operating committee. But the operator may be Shell, it may be Chevron, it may be a company with special technical skills and not necessarily a lot of capital, but they lead on the whole project. And I've got a number of points here that I think I'll just leave you to read. But the key point in that relationship is the tension between the operating company and the other companies that are all in the joint venture. Now remember, please, they're all in business. They don't trust each other. They work together, it's like an alliance, but the operator, if there are no constraints, will spend. Could be spending a lot of money, then goes to the other companies and say, now, can we have some money, please, to pay for all these bills? So you need to put in process some ways of putting a brake on this and checking that the operator doesn't spend too much. In the old American contracts, there were no brakes or very little. Why? Because the amounts were not huge. The moment you had very expensive areas like, let's say, the North Sea, very, very expensive, the operator could spend huge amounts of money, so the other parties had to keep an eye on that expenditure to prevent the operator from spending. So you've got that authorization for expenditure document that I've mentioned here. Many disputes in this area, many. The parties fall out with each other over expenditure. So gas, as I've said there, again, see that little model I've got, tech, parties, model. Gas is heavy and it needs a different way of being dealt with. Gas, sale, and production agreement, price formula, pricing in the agreement. We'll talk about this next week, so I'm just going to jump on that point. I already said about pricing being very, very tricky and a source of many disputes. Renewable energy, and super fast on this. I've got quite a lot of slides on this. I'll just have to put them up and you can have a look at them. But in the background, you've got the climate change debate. And some facts here about solar power, wind, battery storage, hydro. The typical project structure. Note there, you've got lenders, you've got developers. It is not like the oil and gas business. It's different, it's a different structure. And right at the bottom there, you've got the power purchase agreement. If you are involved with a data center, you will be well aware of those. And there are many different kinds of PPAs. And if we, in the next few lectures, I hope we'll get a chance maybe to talk about those, because they're quite. Some of them are called virtual PPAs. Some of them are physical PPAs. There are different, and the companies, law firms around you in London are dealing with these all the time at the moment. I'm not going to give you any names of firms in case you think I'm advertising them, but there are a few of them specializing in these PPAs for data centers. Big, potentially very, very big business. Project contract structure. Here you are, PPAs, happy people. They've just concluded one, and we've got one more minute. Contract for difference. That's quite a technical subject. We could come back to that another time. But it is a long-term contract, another one of those. The generator sells the electricity to the off-taker, typically a utility. And this could be happening in the UK, but it could be happening in Ghana, right around the world. They use very, very similar types of agreement. There may not be a legally binding PPA on anybody, but there's going to be a lot of similarities.